in a really good mood to enjoy them.
All right, what are you?
I don't mean that.
No, I know what you mean, though. I mean, but you're always in a good mood.
Yeah. Insane, which means you don't like them. In that frame of mind, yeah. Saw Conquer at and he tells me casually, yeah, I'm going to Griffin tonight. Yeah. He's good at that sort of stiletto. Was he really going? Yeah, no, he's really going.
Hey, Kyle, don't forget to turn your mic back on. That's always the danger of turning it off.
Pitching, defense, so that's real weird. Both teams are not strong. And they can change. Decent. I'm trying to be unbiased in a long in 7 years.
So it hasn't started to rain yet. It's supposed to start by noon.
I saw some echoes come over on the radar, but nothing on the ground.
Should get a couple inches out of it.
What?
I think we'll get a couple inches.
Over the next couple of days. Yeah.
I learned to read them the same way, but I can't read it.
It doesn't, it sees it from the other multiple virus.
This was things that I've seen it in internet pages. I go through it. Yeah. And it wasn't as no, yeah, yeah. Where'd you go? After it's seniors. Okay.
Real quick.
Yes. Yeah. Some kind of around this. So,
All right, so I guess you need that.
that's something I got. Did we ever hear back from the
He's on.
He's broadcasting it, so I don't know if he's on, but there's, I think, 6 viewers.
Okay. Follow up and find out. Before we get going on the process, follow up with just 12 viewers now. They're gonna, if we,
You're broadcasting to a worldwide audience of 12
they're not
viewers.
interested. Right. So I know whether it looks like it's.
So what are you gonna do after you're done?
So what?
What are you gonna do after you're done?
Well, the company that I've been contracting for.
He's broadcasting it, so it's going out over YouTube. And there's, I don't know who's all on there. There's 11 viewers right now.
Allow me to work here.
It's Andrew Winters, which is, I don't know.
Yeah, they're actually based out of Texas, and they have groups in San Diego, San Francisco, New York,
Plus it's
Chicago.
recording in archive.
There's a opening department. See if I can start setting something out like that up here, where they get 2 or 3 grad students working part-time consultants. If the company does well, maybe even actually fund grad students as a private source of revenue. So it's something that I want to talk about more in the future. As chair, you'll have some power over how much we can.
I guess even
As a chair, you probably have some power over how much we can collaborate. So something to consider that was going to lead you on to. You'll be seeing more.
Okay, I think we're gonna get started. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Kyle Griffin, who's today defending his PhD dissertation research. Kyle's from the Washington, D.C. area, where it has rained for 13 straight days, measurably, and stands to be maybe 3 or 4 more, which already has shattered the all-time record for most consecutive days of measurable rain. Pretty unbelievable. Kyle originally came to us via a longer-term affiliation with the Department of Atmospheric Sciences, whatever else they call themselves, at University of Albany, and that included earning both a BS and an MS degree, one of them 6 years ago, one of them 4 years ago, right? This May, yeah, okay. And Kyle has a roving intellect and lots of technical skills. And in fact, that combination's occasionally forced me to remind him to stay focused on the core of the interesting stuff he's going to tell you about today. And we've had more than a few run-ins about that, but I think it's paid off in the long run. I first met Kyle at the Cyclone workshop in, was it March 2011? I think when Croy came along, when you were just about to be part of my group. Croy came along, it was a beautiful sunny week. And that was in Monterey, California. And at the time, Kyle looked rather like this. And I wasn't aware that, and this is all true, as you know, Kyle's undergone 6 or 7 hairstyle changes since he arrived in the department, and one of them looked rather like a famous rock and roller. And I had other pictures, but I thought if I made this one myself, it might be the funniest one of the bunch. I don't know. But I'll tell you, when I met him, I quickly realized that his sort of offbeat ways, his very good sense of humor, and his abiding interest in the physical phenomena of the atmosphere was really going to be a great addition to my group. And luckily, he now already by this time met his now wife, Sarah Monette, at a field program. And so the considerable recruitment pressure that I would have otherwise been under, because he is a talented scholar, was considerably diminished by the romance. So Sarah, thank you very much for that. And Kyle's been a major figure in my group since arriving here in the fall 2012 term, and I think his friendly, outgoing personality really fit perfectly into and in fact helped to shape what's been a tremendous run over much of this last 10 years in my group of just one great person after another. We've had a really great time. He has a particular interest in the long-term evolutions of background environments that lead to significant individual weather events or patterns of variability in the atmosphere, and that anybody who's come to one of his weather discussions over these 4 years could attest to that. It's certain that in a context of describing any recent weather event, Kyle's going to bring you back at least 2 weeks and connect things from all over the hemisphere, sometimes both hemispheres, to try and give you an idea of how things are working. And you know, that ultra, I'll call it an ultra-synoptic perspective, has really dovetailed well with his research regarding the variability of the North Pacific jet stream. And it's going to continue to inform his professional prospects as he moves from graduate student, hopefully, to research meteorologist for Risk Pulse, which is an energy, agriculture, and logistics management company. It's based out of Austin. And they have the wisdom to allow him to continue working here, which benefits not only us, but also SCC, because that means Sarah can stay here. So there's a lot of good that comes out of that. So we're hoping for more continued interactions between Kyle and the department. But today, Kyle's going to tell us about his investigations of the preferred modes of North Pacific jet variability, their downstream impacts, and tropical and extratropical precursors. Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, John. Stellar introduction, as always. Expected nothing less. All right, so for my talk today, I wanted to first give you a brief outline of what I intend to cover. First of all, I want to provide some motivation for this study, which, as you can probably tell from the title, will very much focus on jet variability. I then want to show you how I've examined 2 leading modes of North Pacific jet variability, specifically talking about identifying their upstream precursors, as well as downstream impacts associated with those modes. Then there's let's kind of put that aside for a moment and cover isotropic pressure depth. It's something that I will introduce as a tool that can be quite potentially useful to diagnose tropical and extratropical interactions. And then I also want to go back and diagnose the leading modes of jet variability, as we discussed in the first section, in context of the isotropic pressure depth from the second section, and kind of marry those 2 concepts to really bring home an idea of how the tropical extratropical interactions can drive these modes of North Pacific jet variability. So first of all, part of the motivation to examine jet variability stems from Chu et al. 1993, who compared consecutive dry and wet winters in Hawaii, 1981 and 1982 to be exact. Chu found that the wet winters was characterized by a shorter 200 hectopascal, shorter zonal extent of the 200 hectopascal wind speeds, while the dry winter was characterized by a more extended 200 hectopascal jet. This work was these types of results were also found to be consistent with the work of Auken and Martin in 2004, where they looked at the composite 300 hectopascal zonal wind associated with periods of active and inactive conal low activity. What you noted was that when there's increased conal lows, or more common conal lows, you notice that the jet associated with them is shorter. Well, it turns out that those conal lows is what drives the Hawaiian rainfall during these months. As a result, this kind of brings that whole discussion full circle. Similarly, with the longer extended jet, that leads to a reduced period of subtropical cyclogenesis and drier winters for Hawaii. Jaffe et al. Focused actually on the variability of the jet itself, identifying in an objective manner jet variability, jet retractions. Specifically, this particular mode of variability occurs over approximately a 10-day duration. And it turns out that these retraction events, as you might surmise from the first two pieces of literature I discussed, these retraction events also led to an increase in Hawaiian rainfall. We can, of course, look at these this jet variability in a more objective manner as well. One of the first steps beyond that was when Jaffe et al. In 2011 actually looked at this with an empirical orthogonal function analysis, specifically focusing on the 300 millibar zonal wind over the North Pacific, and found that the first mode of variability consisted of a jet extension and jet retraction phases when the EOF is either positive or negative. This is consistent actually with the findings of a slightly earlier paper from Athanasiadis et al. In 2010, who looked at the first two EOFs of North Pacific zonal wind. What you find is that the first EOF is the extension and retraction mode, whereas the second EOF is a poleward and equatorward shift of the jet exit region. But you might recall that Jaffe et al. Found that the retractions from a couple slides previous, those retractions that they identified occur in about a 10-day timescale. So one of the things that we wondered was, is this timescale characteristic of other modes of jet variability as well? To start pursuing this question, we used 6-hourly, 2.5-degree in-sub-Ankara analysis data for the winter season defined to be November through March over the 31 years of 1980 through 2010. We initially constructed EOFs to reproduce the retraction mode identified by Jaffe et al. In 2011. But in order to get at that temporal coherency, we actually extended the EOF analysis to allow for some measure of that 10 days to be considered. Let me show you a little bit what I mean. So typical empirical orthogonal function analysis results in identifying a mode, or more than one mode, of variance of a given field. So what you'll see is we have two-dimensional here. We have latitude by longitude. Pretty straightforward. Typically, these patterns, when this is positive, these anomalies will be negative, and that's it. This is an instantaneous picture. However, if we extend this analysis in time, then not only do we find this pattern in latitude and longitude, but we also find how this pattern evolves over time. And this extra dimension helps to ensure that we're identifying temporally coherent structures that may or may not be identified by the spatial EOF alone. So the time extend EOFs that we constructed used the 250 hectopascal zonal wind, again constructed over the November through March period, and we limited the extent of that domain from 10 to 80 north and 100 east to 100 west. So covering a wide swath of the North Pacific and Asia and North America on either side as well. We then went ahead and specified a 10-day window length for an approximately match the synoptic-scale variability that we wanted to target with this analysis. So to show you the EOFs as they were identified via a methodology similar to that of Jaffe et al. And Athanasiadis, we find the first two EOFs. First of all, EOF 1, which that has a large positive anomaly in the exit region of the climatological jet. The climatological jet being identified by these thin black contours every 10 meters per second. The positive anomaly in the exit region of this jet core helps to either extend it, or since the sign of an EOF is arbitrary, if this is a negative anomaly, it would help to retract the climatological extent of the jet. Similarly, for EOF2, the positive anomaly on the poleward flank of the exit region of the jet would actually help to shift this axis of wind further poleward. Whereas if we were to take the negative of this particular pattern, then you see that the anomaly down here would be positive, and we're talking about an equatorward shift of the jet. However, the time-extended EOFs are a little bit more than just the 2D structures that we see here. They're actually fully evolving 3D structures. And I had to build an animation, and I'm trying to avoid it life for me. So enjoy the pretty moving pictures while you can. What we see here is that there's actually some evolution over a 10-day time frame. This is images every 6 hours that really show how the jet intensifies and decays. And it's not mirror images either side. There's a real coherent structure throughout this 10-day window that really is capturing a little bit more of the variability than we would with a single jet alone. We can also look at the temporal component of EOFs, which are the principal components, or PCs. And we can look at that across in a few different manners. The images here are the 2009 to 2010 winter time series of principal components. We have 3 different lines on here. The first one is the traditional principal component, which is, or what I'm calling the traditional principal component, which is the principal component that is taken from the traditional EOF, the 2D EOF, and varies at every 6 hourly time step. This is calculated, like I said, at every 6 hourly time step, and actually has quite a bit of what appears to be noise to it. You can smooth that PC though over 10 days. So if you apply a 10-day moving window to it, then what you end up getting is a very nice smoother representation of that PC, which actually looks somewhat similar to the black line, which is the PC from the time-extended EOF analysis. However, the time-extended EOF analysis maintains a little bit more of the peaks or high amplitude peaks of variability that are lost when you smooth over, but well captured in the traditional PC. So the time-extended PC helps provide a little bit of the best of both worlds, both maintaining the high amplitude events, while also filtering out some of the higher frequency noise that we wouldn't be looking for from examining synoptic-scale evolution of patterns. So using those principal components, we were able to construct composite analyses. These composite analyses were mainly intended to examine the upstream precursors to and downstream impacts of each phase, positive and negative, of the 2 EOFs. In each composite, the events were selected from local maxima and minima in each time-extended PC time series, where those maxima and minima exceeded 1.5 standard deviations. And then we'll also define the center of the 10-day window. The 10 days we're taking the time-extended EOF over to be day 0, or D0 in this notation, while the beginning or end of the time-extended EOF window will be day -5 and day +5, respectively. All this data is from the 2.5 degree end sub-end covering analysis to be consistent with the data set that we use to calculate the EOFs over. And statistical significance on the following plots is indicated to be at or above the 95% level. So let me orient you with the composite, these composite maps here for a moment. There's going to be 2 series, or 2 different columns, as you can see. On the left here, we'll have a series of columns that includes a 250 hectopascal zonal wind, shaded where it is statistically significant, per the color bar here on the bottom, and anomalous 250 hectopascal heights in red where positive, blue where negative, and significant where you see the stippling as well. On the right, on the other hand, we have the 850 hectopascal temperatures. Again, those temperatures are shaded and only where significant, per the color bar here on the bottom, as well as the 850 hectopascal height anomalies, positive and negative, again, with the same notation, and again, only significant where you see the stippling. These panels are day -5, and we will also be at day 0 in a moment, as well as day +5. So we're going to step through the 10 days of the time-extended EOF window. So initially, what we see here is between 250 and 850 hectopascals, we see 2 very well stacked and tropospheric deep negative height anomalies, indicating we have a nice vertically stacked anomalous cyclone, which happens to be located on the poleward side of this enhanced or positive zonal wind anomaly, which happens to be in the exit region of the jet. The anomaly is only about 15 meters per second right now, but over time evolves to be what we identified with these composites, which is the zonal extension of the climatological jet stream. And you can see that the strength of the height anomalies at both upper and lower levels is becoming significant, but much larger. You also notice that at this point, a small positive height anomaly appears over Hawaii at upper levels, which helps to further intensify the gradient between the two main anomaly centers, and as a result, the resulting wind between them as well. Then by day +5, we can see that that zonal wind anomaly extends even further to the east coast, or towards the west coast of the United States, although becoming a little bit lower in magnitude. At this point, though, the low-level cyclone associated with the large trough over the Gulf of Alaska begins to impact the western coast of the United States. And although it's a limited area, you can see that there's a region of statistically significant temperature anomalies in excess of at least 4 degrees Celsius over parts of the northern plains. And this is, it's a relatively small signal, but it's one that occurs, 5 days after the peak in jet extension. So something that we found to be interesting. We can actually follow this up with a similar analysis of jet retraction events as well. So we're still looking at time extended EOF1, but the negative phase of it. Conversely, a lot of what we see is actually has some similarities to what we saw on the previous slide, but in this case, with the anomalies have opposing signs. So what we notice is that at the upper levels, the 250 hectopascal height anomalies are very positive over the Gulf of Alaska, and that's also true at 850 hectopascals. So we have this tropospheric, deep, vertically stacked anomalous ridge actually in this area, or positive height anomalies, I should say, be safe. And that's, of course, on the poleward flank of this large negative zonal wind anomaly. This is what characterizes the jet retraction events. That jet then, those zonal wind anomalies rather intensify, again, reaching in excess of negative 30 meters per second by this point in time. So greatly diminishing the zonal extent of the jet as these positive height anomalies, again, throughout the troposphere begin to intensify. At the same time, we also can note the beginning of a rather large area of negative height anomalies beginning to impact much of Alaska and northwest Canada, already in excess of -4 or -5 degrees Celsius. They only expand by the time we reach day +5, actually covering a lot of eastern Siberia as well, and perhaps even starting to influence a little bit of the west coast of the United States. At this point, the anomalous positive height anomalies are beginning to weaken somewhat, and the retraction of the jet is also becoming a little less pronounced as well. So now let's actually go ahead and move ahead to the poleward shifted jet. This is the positive phase of the second EOF. Again, same stuff as before, and in fact, some of these patterns look a little bit similar as well. You see that there's a positive height anomaly at low latitudes, south of a negative height anomaly at higher latitudes over the Aleutians there. And between the two, the enhanced height gradient helps to support an enhancement of the westerly winds on, in this case, the poleward flank of the jet exit region. Those anomalies are, although they are smaller, they do appear to also be tropospheric deep as well. We do see this here at day 0, particularly the negative height anomaly, now centered over the Gulf of Alaska, intensifies significantly. We see that the zonal wind anomaly associated with this poleward shift of the jet is strong. It's reaching 25 meters per second. It's not quite as intense as what we saw with the first EOF, but it is still it's not that far behind it, I should say. And the low-level cyclone associated with that trough over the Gulf of Alaska is actually beginning to drive a significant warming, or is at least associated with a significant warming in central Canada, with temperature anomalies on the order of +5, approaching maybe a sliver of +6 degrees Celsius, which is, of course, a significant change from the lack of anomalies 5 days prior. And that only intensifies further. We get anomalies over central Canada and tracks warmth over the entirety of Canada. It's not a small place. You end up seeing that these anomalies exceed +8 degrees Celsius by the time that we get to 5 days after the peak of the poleward shift of the jet. At the same time, that poleward shift of the jet begins to move a little bit further east as well, as the upper level pattern also amplifies. You can see that this negative height anomaly over the Aleutians maintains its intensity of about -200 meters from day 0 through day 5, while the upstream or the downstream ridge intensifies from a little over +50 meters to well over 150 meters. So it triples the magnitude. And I'm sure that the intensification of that ridge helps to support some of the warmth we are observing over Canada. And then finally, one more series of these maps. We have the equatorward shifted jet, which is the negative phase of time extended UF2. It looks a little bit similar to the jet retraction in that we have a large region of negative height anomalies over the Gulf of Alaska, but you might notice that it is shifted, of course, slightly further poleward. You say, wait a second, this is the equatorward shifted jet. Well, the equatorward shifted jet is actually located farther south because the enhanced winds are actually going to be on the equatorward flank of this negative height anomaly. And as a result, actually enhances some of the upper level, the 250 hectopascal winds over Hawaii. This enhancement of the winds becomes slightly more obvious at day 0 when it actually appears that an argument could be made that we have an enhanced subtropical jet, not only across much of the Pacific, but actually still statistically significant as it moves into a portion of the United States as well, although this connection is a little more tenuous because we're only looking at zonal wind. But you do see those intensification of the upper level pattern here with a much stronger positive height anomalies over the Aleutians and much stronger negative height anomalies over Canada. Well, those negative height anomalies over Canada are associated with a strong, already -8 degrees, in excess of -8 degrees Celsius temperature anomaly over Western Canada and already cold over much of all of Canada as well. That only becomes more so at day +5. So we're talking about -8 degrees C anomalies maintained over at least 5 days immediately following these equator shifted events. So nothing to scoff at, despite the fact that the upper level pattern is perhaps not quite as robust in appearance as some of the previous phases.
Why is there no temperature anomaly at T-5 either for this polar anomaly case or for the warm anomaly?
At T-5? You're talking about, so you're talking about here?
Yeah.
I think that's a great question.
It's not significant.
Yeah, and that's one important thing is that these anomalies are not significant. It turns out when you're doing the analysis, much of Western Canada has the largest standard deviation or largest variance of 850 hectopascal temperatures of anywhere in the globe during the winter. So you actually need an anomaly of at least 5 degrees Celsius to be significant. So although I believe at this point they may be like 3 or 4, which is somewhat more comparable to what you observed at the first time extended UF. So to briefly summarize all those panels we just flew past you real quick, the jet extension events, positive time extended UF1, are associated with an anomalous mid-latitude cyclone over the Gulf of Alaska and low-latitude ridging near Hawaii. This kind of combined pinwheel effect helps you to extend the jet and results in warmth over North America. Whereas the negative phase of time extended UF1, the jet retraction events, are associated with strong anomalous ridging over the Gulf of Alaska and low-latitude trough near Hawaii. So exactly the opposite pattern. And as a result, your result over North America, certainly not a Polaroid negative by any means, but a significant opposite regardless, even with the geographic shift. We can also observe with time extended UF2, a poleward shifted jet with anomalous, stems from anomalous trough near the Aleutians, anomalous ridging north of Hawaii, a pattern very similar to jet extensions, but surprise, surprise, shifted a little bit poleward. This is combined with an intense warmth over much of Canada. It's not immediately clear why the low level temperature anomalies would be so much greater with time extended UF2 than they are with time extended UF1. Similarly, the equator shifted jets again have a ridge over the Aleutians and a trough north of Hawaii. You'll notice that again looks very similar to the jet retraction events, but the resultant impacts over Canada are again about twice the magnitude in terms of the 850 hectopascal temperatures. We also note that in 2 of the 4 phases, that there are significant outgoing long-wave radiation, or OLR anomalies, in the composite mean sets as well. OLR is a good proxy for deep convection in the tropics. And when we look at these composites then, so again, we're looking at D-5, 0, and +5. But on the left now, we just have the retracted jet cases, and on the right, we now have just the poleward shift cases. So we're just going to focus on these 2 where these anomalies were significant. But you can notice that there's actually some significant convective anomalies over the maritime continent, specifically Indonesia, moving into the Philippines, Papua New Guinea. And these anomalies appear to be quasi-stationary, perhaps moving eastward with time. John and I always had good discussions about that. That implies that there is a coherent and long-lasting convective anomaly associated with these events. And they, for sure, that must have some impact on the jet variability, but we're not entirely clear how that occurs. Well, we wanted to look at then how convection can impact the variability of the jet stream. So looking at some of the previous literature on this subject, just very briefly, there's been some studies, many of them typified by the study of Archibald et al. 2013, where they look at convection, in this case a tropical cyclone, and the divergent wind at the upper levels that acts on a PV gradient and serves to intensify a jet locally. That divergent wind occurs over a very short distance. We're talking about a mere hundreds of kilometers. You can also look at a study such as that of Reamer et al. 2008, which, in addition to looking at the divergent wind, also looked at the balanced and also the rotational wind. And this is also shown to be able to increase zonal wind locally, again over a few degrees of latitude or a few hundred kilometers. But we're not entirely sure how the impact of convection on the mid-latitude circulation can play out over thousands of kilometers yet, which is something that we'd be looking at given those composites you just saw. So we wanted to know how the impact of this convection on the mid-latitude circulation, especially jet streams, can be better diagnosed. So in order to do so, let's consider that a vertical cross-section in isotropic units. The thickness of any given isotropic layer can be described in pressure units, such as this one right here. This is what we call the pressure depth, or the isotropic pressure depth, rather. The pressure depth is a direct measure of the mass in that isotropic layer. We can also think about the fact that deep convection tends to exhaust mass at a range of isotropic levels. Those isotropic levels will tend to correspond with the boundary layer theta E that the convection is rooted in. Whatever that value may be, in this case, for this schematic, I'm estimating about 350 Kelvin. It's about that potential temperature, or theta, that you would expect to see the exhaust farther at high levels. And this exhausted mass will inflate the isotropic levels, and as a result, increase the pressure depth. And this increased pressure depth is associated with reduced static stability as the isotopes move further apart in the vertical. We can also examine this relationship in a quantitative sense. Specifically, let's first take the geostrophic wind, written here as the gradient of the Montgomery stream function, and take its vertical derivative in isotropic coordinates. This yields us a isotropic form of the thermal wind relationship. But instead of keeping this in Montgomery stream function, let's put it in a variable that's a little bit more familiar. So we can rephrase this by taking the vertical derivative of the Montgomery stream function in isotropic coordinates as well. We can see that we can put this in terms of pressure, and finding that the thermal wind relationship can also be phrased in terms of this right here, which is the gradient of pressure. And we can actually look at this over a non-infinitesimal isotropic layer as looking at this in a horizontal schematic. Let's first consider a theoretical pressure depth anomaly. So we have pressure depth isobars of P prime and 2P prime. So we have this nice positive anomaly. And you can take the gradient associated with that positive pressure depth to be pointing inward. If we take K cross that gradient then, we find that the positive pressure depth anomalies are then inherently associated with anomalous anticyclonic vertical geostrophic wind shear. We can then actually impose, let's just say that we impose this anomalous vertical geostrophic wind shear on a jet stream. And you can see that if we increase, let's say, the geostrophic wind here, we would not only start to be increasing the geostrophic wind shear, but also the winds within that jet, assuming that jet is in or proximate to the isotropic layer that contains this pressure depth anomaly. As a result, we have a method to diagnose how pressure depth and inflations of that pressure depth can directly correspond to increases or changes in the intensity of a jet stream. So, in order to give you a little bit more context, we went ahead to develop a climatology of the climate of pressure depths using climate forecast system reanalysis over a 32-year period, 1979 to 2010. That data has half degree horizontal resolution and data steps 4 times daily. We were able to interpolate from the pressure levels to every 5 Kelvin isotropic levels. And then we were able to calculate 32-year mean pressure depth at each grid point, at each 5 Kelvin layer, at each individual analysis time. And that yields you, we need to combine a few things. This very pretty map, if I do say so myself, of 315 to 330 Kelvin mean isotropic pressure depth over the whole globe over the entire month of January for this particular map. You'll notice a few different things. Let's just focus on the North Pacific since I'm a little biased. We have some of the greatest positive pressure depths over the entire North Pacific are actually over in this particular layer, the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer, can be found west of Mexico. Similarly, you'll notice that even globally, pressure depth becomes mostly smaller as you move towards the poles. You'll also notice, with a few more seconds of staring at it, I'm sure, that the areas with the tightest or the largest gradients of pressure depth are just a couple of regions where these are particularly pronounced. If you're familiar with your state of your synoptic circulations, you'll also realize that, especially during the month of January, these regions of the tightest, the largest pressure depth gradients happen to co-locate with the regions of the greatest mean wind speed. In this case, I've chosen 300 hectopascals to represent this rough layer. So these climatological jets are associated with regions of the tightest pressure gradient, which we know are also associated with the pressure gradient, rather, is associated with vertical geostrophic wind shear. Then we can say that this is how that relationship plays out climatologically as well. We can also choose from the climatology the 120 hectopascal isotropic pressure depth from the mean. And I'll show you how this fits into climatology in a second, but if we choose this contour, you can see that it actually corresponds reasonably well as a proxy for the jet axis, at least in the northern hemisphere and in the parts of the globe that we're going to focus on the most. So if we take that back to our climatology, you can see that those align very nicely with the locations where that pressure depth gradient is the largest. But for now, let's just focus in on the North Pacific. So zooming in. And let's also zoom in a little further. Instead of looking at the entire month of January, let's just consider a single time, 12Z on the 15th of January. For 12Z on the 15th of January, you can notice that this is the same climatological mean you looked at before. It's similar, a little bit more noisy as we're only averaging across the 32 years. However, we want to look a little bit at the variability as well. In order to do so, we started looking at the distributions of pressure depth anomalies at these points. And we noted that if we just take a particular point here, let's say this purple star, then you can see that if we plot a histogram of each of the pressure depth anomaly for each of those 32 years at that exact point in this 315 to 330 Kelvin layer, we get a very odd looking distribution. It's certainly not symmetric, and it's definitely not normal. And we can sample around a second point here. Let's pick something maybe a little bit more less prone to high variance. And all right, well, this may be a little bit more symmetric, but it's still not particularly well fit to a normal curve. And we actually sampled around a number of these points. I won't bore you with thousands of histograms. But I'd rather just emphasize the fact that the non-normality here made us reconsider how we were going to consider the variance of pressure depths. And as a result, I actually have something that I term the standard departure. I ran this past Dan Weinbaum a couple of times a few years ago, and he assured me it was a reasonable statistic, despite not being used before. The standard departure calculate is something that's calculated independently for positive and negative anomalies. We want to start with the anomaly distribution at any given point. I'm pulling the second one from the two I just showed you for simplicity's sake. To calculate the negative standard departure, let's take only the negative anomalies at each point. So throughout the positive ones for now. Let's mirror them around 0. This simulates a normal distribution. Let's go ahead and calculate a traditional standard deviation based on that distribution. In this case, that's about 40 hectopascals. Doing this for both the negative and the positive values, we can then come up with what we can term the negative standard departure and the positive standard departures. In some sense, it's a standard deviation separately for whether the anomaly is positive or negative. But by having these separate values, when we standardize them, we can actually compare the positive and negative anomalies quite readily. So we'll use them in our climatological analysis here in a moment. So let's return to the real world for a second, even if climatological real world. Let's look at North Pacific here. Again, we have our thin black contours. This represents the climatological Pacific jet. If there's nothing else I teach you today, that's definitely got to be it. And we also have this pink axis. This is still about 120 hectopascal depth contour. It's our approximate proxy for the jet axis during the month of January. Let's impose a schematic of a negative pressure depth anomaly. So in this case, this is a lot like the schematic I showed you earlier, but now in this case for a negative pressure depth anomaly. Pick an arbitrary location here in the exit region of the jet, just south of that jet axis. We know that from the schematic earlier, if you have a negative pressure depth anomaly, that's going to be associated with anomalous cyclonic geostrophic wind shear. And that anomaly would then actually serve to enhance the westerly winds and the geostrophic wind shear on the equatorward flank of that anomaly while reducing it farther north. As a result, the jet axis might actually flip sides of the anomalies there and result in a pattern where you actually get the jet axis to be something relatively close to perfectly zonal across the Pacific. This actually could potentially result in an extension of the jet along 30 degrees north, implying that, knowing that this negative anomaly, pressure depth anomaly, which is associated with high static stability being something you typically associate with high values of PV, and as a result, mid-latitude troughs, may imply that a negative anomaly in this position might tends to suggest extratropical forcing for the extended jet cases that we were talking about earlier. Of course, this location isn't arbitrary, I'm joking. It actually is picked to correspond exactly with the region where negative standard departures are, on average, the largest during the month of January. And now if we composite the zonal winds over the North Pacific, based on the fact that a negative pressure depth anomaly exists here, I'm perform a little magic with the climatology contours here. So they will, in a moment, extend to be this composite total wind. You'll see that those climatological wind contours, given the negative anomaly here, are actually longer. Let's flip back and forth real quick. So they extend out to here, but climatologically, oh, they're 20 degrees further west. That's a roughly 2,000 kilometer extension of that 30 meter per second zonal wind contour with negative anomalies in there. So that helps to support that negative anomalies here may actually indeed support something that looks like the extended phase of the jet. Of course, we can look at this a little bit more coherently as well. So we're going to go back to composite analyses maps. I hope you like them. And look at jet extensions, specifically for positive time extended UF1. So these are basically the exact same dates as before. In fact, the zonal wind shading will be the 250 hectopascal zonal wind anomalies as it was before as well. In addition, you still have your black contours, which are your climatological jet. And the big change here is that our red and blue contours are now positive in red and negative in blue isotropic pressure depth anomalies. What you do notice is that the top panel now is the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer. Pressure depth anomalies are on top, whereas the 340 to 355 Kelvin pressure depth anomalies are on the bottom. We can say that 315 to 330 Kelvin anomalies roughly represent mass that's been lofted by convection in the mid-latitudes. Whereas the 340 to 355 Kelvin pressure depth anomalies got gradients still to label, but are actually representing tropical convection. So you can kind of think of this as a mid-latitude source for pressure depth anomalies and a tropical source of these pressure depth anomalies. So let's actually talk about the images before I go forward here. You'll notice that for the most part, the negative pressure depth anomalies tend to be a little bit roughly organized across much of the North Pacific. So I won't focus on them too much, but you do see two more distinct regions of positive pressure depth anomalies in the 340 to 355 Kelvin layer. You see this positive pressure depth anomaly over far southern China. Another interesting anomaly over over the tropical eastern Pacific as well. We'll track these through time, flipping forward every 3 days to day 0, which is the peak in this given mode of variability. So at day -6, what you'll notice is these two anomalies in the 340 to 355 Kelvin layer begin to move together. Jet and perhaps even the exit region of that jet. You can start to see a little bit of this zonal wind anomaly associated with the poleward flank of the pressure depth anomaly and the tight gradient, especially associated with that anomaly as well. You'll also observe that negative height anomaly or negative pressure depth anomalies at 315 to 330 Kelvin layer also tend to seem to be congealing in a location also near the exit region of the climatological jet. By day -3, these anomalies become a little bit more organized. We're getting a much more significant pressure depth anomaly, again in the exit region of the climatological jet. something similar just to its south in the 340 to 355 Kelvin layer, just on the poleward flank of that X region of the jet. Now, these two are already supporting a very significant zonal wind anomaly on the order of 25 meters per second. And then by day 0, these anomalies actually reach their peak intensity in excess of 50 hectopascals in the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer, I should say negative 50, and a similar 36, it looks like, hectopascals in the 340 to 355 Kelvin layer. These two juxtaposed, if we can infer this, given this negative anomaly, we know that there is anomalous cyclonic wind shear around it that's going to help enhance the westerly wind anomalies here. And similarly, positive pressure depth anomaly is associated with anomalous anticyclonic wind shear, and that helps to enhance the anomalous westerly winds on its poleward flank. So these two act in concert to help support that zonal wind anomaly, as we saw. You'll also notice, I'll mention this on this one, that we have seen a little bit of a downstream amplification pattern that we even notice in the pressure depth field as well. This helps to perhaps support some of the downstream impacts we see in the days to come. It's just beginning to amplify. If I step back to day -3, it's just beginning to amplify here as we approach day 0. That might help set the stage for some of those anomalous temperatures you see at day +5 and earlier deposits. We can also look at this in a jet retraction sense. So again, keeping the plots consistent, but now considering cases, the 40 cases or so, where jet retractions peak at day 0. So in this case, in the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer, we see the positive pressure depth anomalies. We see one pre-existing in the Central Pacific, another one that's beginning to organize over Central Asia. While we're not immediately clear on the source of this, it might actually be that this is a slightly less common method of lifting or increasing the pressure depth. And you can actually get that sometimes from diabatic processes anywhere in the layer. It's typically convective heating, but it could also be elevated heating on the Tibetan Plateau as well. So sometimes when you see these positive pressure depth anomalies emanating from Asia or central China, and you'll see it again later as well, consider that might not necessarily be convection, it might be elevated heating from the plateau. Could also be both. It's very hard to tell in the composite sense. We'll also note that in the 340 to 55 Kelvin layer, there's a significant negative pressure depth anomaly over and near Hawaii. So let's go ahead and step forward and show that in the tropical layer, this pressure depth anomaly is beginning to move a little bit further west. In the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer, that anomaly from over China is beginning to move through the core of the jet as the Central Pacific one seems to stay still. As a result, you get a very zonally elongated positive pressure depth anomaly. That begins to congeal a little bit better, kind of reorganize, perhaps through the deformation in the jet exit region, climatological jet exit region, I should say, beginning to help actually grow this anomaly a little bit and organize into a more coherent bubble, let's say, of positive pressure depth. That can be located here, obviously, just poleward of what is becoming already at day -3 a distinct negative zonal wind anomaly, already in excess of 30 meters per second. At the same time, in the 340 to 55 Kelvin layer, we see a significant negative pressure depth anomaly. This likely represents the results we saw from Chu et al. And Atkin and Martin and everyone else who's looked at subtropical cyclogenesis as this negative pressure depth anomaly is associated with higher static stability and therefore represents some sort of subtropical trough in that layer as well. And at day 0, this peaks the most, where the ridge becomes quite amplified, I should say, the positive pressure depth anomaly, and combine that with the negative pressure depth anomaly in the 340 to 55 Kelvin layer. And what you're actually seeing is that same pinwheel effect we talked about last on the jet extension cases, but in reverse. So you're getting an enhancement of the westerly flow between the two, and that helps to ensure maximum jet retraction here at day 0. So let's go back out to our wonderful climatological schematic North Pacific for a moment. And what we see here is that we can actually also impose a theoretical positive pressure depth anomaly at a location north of the jet axis. This type of anomaly, as we know from the schematic, would be associated with anomalous anticyclonic geostrophic wind shear, and that would help to actually reduce, I should say, reduce the winds along the jet axis here, the westerly winds along the jet axis, and enhance them farther north, resulting in a more poleward shift of the climatological jet axis. But since we know that positive pressure depth anomalies can only stem from, or for the most part, can only stem from convective exhaust, then we're talking about does that mass exhausted by the deep convection help to force the poleward shift of the climatological jet? And of course, this location, again, would never be arbitrary, chosen to correspond exactly with the region of where positive standard departures are on average the largest during the month of January in the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer. And then let's also do the same experiment we did before. Let's actually impose a real positive pressure depth anomaly here and change our total winds from climatology to those represented by a composite based around a positive pressure depth anomaly in this location. And you can see that these black lines are about to shift, and they do shift for the poleward, although it's not quite as distinct as in the jet extension cases. But it is about 5 to 10 degrees further north, and that certainly does qualify as a poleward shift environment. We'll look through one final set of these composites. Again, same setup as before, but now we're compositing on the poleward shift cases associated with positive time extended UF2. Specifically, only 36 of these cases now. And you'll notice here's a positive pressure depth anomaly. It seems to be almost perfectly emanating from the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. This is one of the reasons why we have that suspicion. It is also located with the Central Pacific, or coexists with a positive pressure depth anomaly in the Central Pacific. And perhaps most interestingly here is that in this extension case, there's a very large positive pressure depth anomaly over southern China in the 340 to 355 Kelvin area. If you recall back to the OR composites that I showed you earlier, you remember that the poleward shift of the jet actually had the largest negative OLR anomalies, or the largest signals for active convection over the maritime continent in Indonesia. So what you may see here is you may be seeing some of that convective outflow upping up against the jet and forcing these positive pressure depth anomalies. Keep that in mind as we go forward. So the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer are two anomalies by day -6. Move together, again, moving through the core of the jet, begin to merge. Briefly at 340 to 355 Kelvin, we're seeing somewhat of an eastward expansion of this pressure depth anomaly. Although it's not particularly well cut out now, we see that a little bit more so here at day -3, where there's actually beginning to be a separate eastern lobe of this convection. And with this eastern, or not with this convection, but this positive pressure depth anomaly that is driven by or likely driven by the tropical deep convection. But at the moment, you can already see that we have a zonal wind, both of these spots, that is represents the poleward shift of the jet exit region. And that seems to correspond relatively well with the pressure depth gradient on the poleward flank of this anomaly. However, there's not really much of a pressure depth gradient located in the 340 to 355 Kelvin layer. This would imply that the pressure depth anomalies in the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer perhaps are the most supportive of this poleward shift of the jet exit region, at least at day -3. However, moving forward, just simply 3 days, we see a drastic change where it turns out that the positive pressure depth anomalies that were supporting this zonal wind anomaly at day -3 have quickly moved downstream, dissipated, thinned out, dispersed. We're not entirely sure. And the most positive pressure depth anomaly can be found over southwestern portion of the United States. In the meantime, that pressure depth anomaly, or sorry, that zonal wind anomaly is now supported by the gradient of pressure depth on the poleward flank of this 340 to 355 Kelvin anomaly, driven by the tropics. As a result, you click back and forth between these two, you can kind of see how we're handing off from a zonal wind anomaly that's driven by the 315 to 330 Kelvin anomalies to one that is driven in the 340 to 355 Kelvin range. So this handoff between a extratropically forced zonal wind anomaly, specifically the poleward shift of the jet, to one that is tropically forced is a very interesting evolution that we're not entirely sure about how it evolves or why it evolves, but it's something that is distinct in this 36-member composite. So to talk about these results real quick, we talked about positive pressure depth anomalies. They typically result from excess mass, likely exhausted by deep convection. Of course, this comes from convection in the tropics and subtropics, and appears to preferentially force, at least from our climatological analysis, the poleward shift of the jet exit region. Similarly, we can look at negative pressure depth anomalies resulting from increased static stability, often associated with a trough of mid-latitude origin, And these negative anomalies arise when one of those troughs encroach into the mid-latitudes and upon the jet as well. And these pressure depth anomalies seem to preferentially force jet extension events as well. To look at those jet extension events, schematically, we notice that these events are associated with positive pressure depth anomalies originating from Eastern Asia and the Eastern Pacific on the tropical side of the jet, while broad mid-latitude trough negative pressure depth anomalies is located on the polar side of the jet. Again, these two combine for a distinct combined pinwheel that helps to extend this jet farther eastward than its climatological extent. It's also important to notice that these pinwheels aren't directly next to each other, but rather have some vertical distance between the two. And as a result, the gradients of pressure depth, which work on geostrophic wind shear across layers, can actually work in concert despite not being in the same layer. You can see a similar action with the jet retraction cases, typically associated with the negative pressure depth anomalies on the tropical side of the jet, but with positive pressure depth anomalies from the mid-latitude portions of Eastern Asia and the Eastern Pacific. Again, that vertical stratification is still, separation rather, is still present, but we get this combined pinwheel of anisotropic vertical geostrophic wind shear around the positive pressure depth anomaly, and again, similar here, that helps to retract the jet. And lastly, the poleward shift of the jet seems to be associated with a unique handoff from positive pressure depth anomalies in the Central Pacific, which we notice here. We're talking about the mid-latitude, 315 to 330 Kelvin anomalies, a few days before peak poleward shift, to a set of, to being supported by pressure depth anomalies that stem from tropical convection in Southeast Asia and the maritime continent. And the support of these by the time we reach peak poleward shift. So to think back, the North Pacific jet stream we showed has two distinct leading modes of variability. We're talking about a jet extension retraction and a poleward and equatorward shift. You've probably heard me say this more than enough today. Each mode consists of a pair of tropically and extratropically driven cyclones and anticyclones straddling the exit region of the jet stream. And for the most part, in EOF1, it helps to create this nice pinwheel effect that I just demonstrated. The downstream impacts are maximized during and in the week following the peak in each mode of variability. We also introduced to you the term isotropic pressure depth, which can serve as a useful tool to diagnose interactions between the tropics and extratropics. In composites of isotropic pressure depth with relation to time extended EOF1, these pressure depths provide insight into the Asian origins of the synoptic-scale ridges and troughs, the positive negative head anomalies that we saw straddle the jet exit region in the composite sense. Similarly, in the poleward shift composites, an interesting handoff occurs between exotropically and then to tropically forced pressure depth anomalies that help to support that poleward shift of the jet. Zach and I have had some, Zach Hanlos and I, who defended a couple weeks ago, have had some discussions that a combination of the jet extension mode and perhaps even the poleward shifted mode is very consistent with some of the composites that he showed in his dissertation and his upcoming paper as well. But as in any good piece of research, the results provide us with more questions than answers. And I'm going to just touch on a few of them here that I think are really key to driving some of this research forward. First of all, we know that the temperature anomalies associated with time-extended UF2 are significant. Time-extended UF1 had some significance as well, but these were the 8 degrees Celsius plus anomalies over Canada. Can any understanding of these anomalies provide some sort of increased predictive skill during week 2? We're talking about our forecasts from days 8 to 14. Is there some sort of predictability increase that we can gain from these? Another question, is it possible and is it even insightful to use isotropic pressure depths to quantify the contributions of individual convective events and convective outflow, and therefore the inflation of pressure depth, to any intensification of a jet stream? Is there a way to actually put a number on that? We think there is, but it's something that we definitely would love to look at further. In addition, convective heating cannot be linked from its remote impacts, or to its remote impacts rather, via these diagnostics that we showed you today. Is that something that can be done on an individual or in a composite basis that would be fruitful for the broader research community? So With that, I'd also like to go through my acknowledgements. First and foremost, John Martin, who already spoiled a little bit of what I was going to say about him. We had him over 5 years ago and did a wonderful job of bringing me in and reining me in as much as possible. It's made me quite more of a writer than I ever could have been on my own, and has kept me, showed me the importance of focusing on the goal at hand while also still entertaining and noting your curiosities as you go forward. So for that and so much more, John, thank you. I'd also like to thank my PhD committee, Michael Morgan, Dan Weimont, Matt Hitchman, and Sam Steckman. Thank you all for coming today, first of all. I'm sure we're gonna have wonderful discussions in a moment. But I think I've had a sit-down conversation with each and every one of these gentlemen at least twice, I think, throughout the years I've been here. And they've all been fruitful, they've all guided the work I've done, and in some of the cases, the work that I want to be doing and wish I had more time for. I also want to thank the rest of the AOS faculty. I've had numerous good discussions with a number of you as well. And that certainly helped impact what you see here. The AOS front office, Debbie, Kathy, Sue, and Sonia all do a wonderful job of supporting things. I also like to thank Pete Pogrant, who has entertained the curiosities that I have in a more technological sense, probably more than John would like to admit or know about, but it's been fun to play around with some things and keep some of your technical skills sharp while you're writing several papers at once. I'd also like to thank a number of the grad students, but especially Zach Hamlos, Andrew Winters, who's hopefully on the digital broadcast today, along with Craig Christensen, Melissa Breeden, and Alex Goldstein. You've all been a wonderful network of friends to help support me, in addition to the rest of the Martin group and a number of the AOS grad students beyond that as well. I'd also like to acknowledge a lot of discussions I've had with friends and colleagues from other institutions. They've certainly helped further my curiosities. In addition to my family, my parents, and I think my sister, hopefully watching also via the webcast today. And lastly, my wife, Sarah, who John already spoiled that story as well, in a perfectly good manner, but who is without a doubt a large portion of the reason why I was so successfully recruited to come. So with that, thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Greg?
Well, it's interesting to use this pressure depth, and of course I use J in a similar way.
Correct.
Now, pressure depth is a little different, but it's not an energy. It's a total amount of entropy.
That's what we look at, yes.
It's the amount of entropy, and so you can't convert entropy into kinetic energy. Kinetic energy, depending on where it, or entropy, depending on where it is, can make a certain amount of energy available to perform work. So it would seem that you really can't do an energy budget with pressure depth. It's not a real quantity. You know, and what it is,
Yeah.
it's entropy. So although you can find a relationship between entropy gradients and jet streams and things like this, it doesn't solve an energy budget. So what I don't see is how you would quantify realistically or quantify rigorously the conversion of entropy mass to kinetic energy that creates a jet.
I think from an energetics perspective, I think that would be very challenging. This might be a case where, as you mentioned, Jake, would be more useful. However, the relationship between the existence of a gradient of pressure simply has to exist in order to have a directly associated anomalous, if we're dealing with pressure anomalies, vertical geostrophic wind shear profile within that layer. So you can say that some portion of that vertical wind shear, which is of course associated with any jet stream, within that layer is directly related to the gradient of pressure. There's no way that comes out of balance.
It's related to the Montgomery stream function gradient, which is proportional to the pressure gradient. You don't accelerate flows on an isotropic surface.
No.
I mean, you don't accelerate on a pressure surface. You accelerate them on an isotropic surface.
Yes, correct.
And so the Montgomery stream function is an energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that can change. It's not directly related to the vertical pressure thickness.
vertical gradient of an interior space is directly related to the pressure space.
Vertical
The pressure
gradient of
in-
Montgomery string function.
Yeah,
But you can change Montgomery string function in a number of ways that don't involve isentropic flow. You can lift
Correct.
a parcel from below.
Yeah, adiabatic flow.
Well, you could have lifting going on because the Montgomery string function is a hydrostatic quantity. It's hard to do energetics with it because you have to integrate hydrostatics vertically from either downward or upward. You have to integrate from some base function. So it doesn't. Well, anyway, I've had trouble with this as well because there's no direct relationship between most of these energy quantities and the ultimate energy that's converting to the jet stream because of the hydrostatic approximation. Even potential energy is difficult to deal with because you can change the potential energy by slipping mass underneath and lifting the whole layer without affecting the entropy at all.
Yeah, and that's why this is simply contained within the layer. We're talking about the mass
Yeah.
within the layer.
So
It's
the
very
problem-
focused. You have to know which layer you're going to look at, of course.
But the problem is that it's hard to do an energy budget in a layer
Oh yeah,
because of the hydrostatic
yeah.
integration that's involved.
Yeah, a lot of external factors can influence the energy in the layer. Absolutely.
So you can find relationships. You could say, all right, I got a pressure depth and I got a jet stream, and they're related. But it would be nice to be able to do a rigorous relationship, between how much energy the kinetic energy, how much kinetic energy is gained, and how much of this other energy is lost. But I'm just saying it's very difficult.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great topic for my next PhD. Brett first.
Yeah, just a question about the pressure depth anomalies. You spoke about their sources. I was curious if you have any idea what causes them to decay, like what the major physical interactions that cause them to decay. I was wondering if radiation plays a role or
Absolutely. If you take a typical, one of the main diabatic components that can cause pressure depths to decrease would of course be radiational cooling. It cools about 1 Kelvin per day. So if you're dealing with 15 Kelvin layers, that's typically what we looked at today, 340, 355, 315, 330. And I tracked that over a week. Well, half that mass may have just fallen out simply from radiation. That's very possible, depending on the distribution of the light. You also have to consider the fact that, unlike potential vorticity, there's no conservation of isentropic pressure. As a result, within the layer, you can still get local convergence and divergence, still be adiabatic flow, but it rearranges the mass within that layer. So you can actually, this is kind of the equivalent of your column stretching, or and how that would be made up for with PV, with the increase in vorticity, in the potential vorticity term. There is no such term here. We're kind of looking at just the static stability part, of course, the inverse of that, from the PV equation. So that convergence divergence from the layer is probably another thing that contributes significantly to what appears to be the decay, especially in the anomaly sense. But we haven't done any sort of mass budget to really get at the numerics of where that mass goes. Okay.
How did you choose the 2 pressure depth layers?
These 2 layers actually stem from work that's been done in John's group back a number of years. It actually stems from the ago. Corey's been trying to get a paper published on that for 3 or 4 years now, I think. Far too long, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't want to get John worked up over here.
It's just 2.
It's 2 years. Oh, I'm sorry. too long, yes. They're intended to focus on where the gradients of PV are where the largest. John, or Corey can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's where the PV gradient was the largest in the 1, 2, 3 PVU channel. And as a result, that's where they thought they could best detect polar jets in the 315 to 330 Kelvin layer and subtropical jets in the 340 to 355 Kelvin. I did an analysis also to look at least on the tropical side of things, typical value layer TE to get 1,000 millibar level. We find that L value between 340 and 350 is a very climatological value of low level TE. So of course, if you get a convection level from there, that would roughly exhaust mass in that 340 to 350 Kelvin level, which helps confirm that choice as well.
You mentioned in your in the poleward shift cases that there was this evidence of some sort of handoff between the lower 315 to 340K to the upper level.
315 to 330?
315 to 330 to the higher levels, because the pressure depth anomalies being responsible for supporting the jet extension or the jet shift. Do you have a conceptual synoptic picture of what that would look like if you're doing sort of standard synoptic charts?
In terms
And
of,
what are the dynamics of that?
I think that would be a very interesting thing to look at a little bit better. As far as I can tell, we would maybe be thinking of, and this is a little bit on the subjective sense, but I would think that you see some sort of positive height anomaly originating in the 300 millibar level, let's say, since I'm assuming you're thinking isomeric sense height anomalies. Then you might see something coming out of the subtropics initially, and then suddenly a height anomaly, let's say the 200 millibar level, comes along and helps to maybe reinforce that, and perhaps even drive that 300 millibar anomaly completely out of the picture. Those height anomalies each have their own three-dimensional structure to them, of course, as well. So the height anomaly is not contained in any one isobaric level or layer either. But rather you end up seeing some sort of subtropical ridging move out and a more tropically sourced upper level height anomaly move in to replace it. As a result, the gradient on the north side of that height anomaly would actually remain in place and remain supporting the zonal wind anomaly, but perhaps would evolve. Of course, since we're looking at the composite sense, it's hard to say if it maybe skips a day, or perhaps there is some sort of two distinct features that we're looking at there. But it's certainly a coherent structure in the composite sense.
Here's an idea. Maybe I'm saying the same thing, but in fewer words, I think. You have an extratropical disturbance that comes down on the poleward side of the jet and grows a cloud head as the cyclone develops. That cloud head promotes 315, 330 Kelvin positive pressure depth bubble that maybe starts to shift the jet poleward. You know, it's the characteristic jet building on the cloud head side, or the poleward side of the cloud head. That then, it also, one thing that you didn't emphasize, which I think is true, and you can see it in the composite shift of the isotax, is that it's also a retraction. There's a little nub that goes poleward, but the whole thing retracts, and I think that lets the subtropics loose. So you get stage one is the extratropical development and the jet exit region, pushes the jet exit isotax a little bit poleward, but mostly retracts the core, and then the subtropics come roaring forward. And that's what I think is going on.
So that would suggest that maybe the compositing is kind of smearing out this. You might actually see two
Yeah,
separate jets.
it'd be so much cooler to look at a subset of these cases in the case study and just see how many of them, sort of like what's active, how many of them show, you know, those characteristics in each case of 60 to 80, 90% of the time to see those things. But I think that we're saying kind of the same thing. But I think that's the basic synoptic evolution.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I think it's pretty consistent. Other questions?
Okay, well, let's thank Zach one more time. Hey, that's just a little revenge.
Oh, yeah.
We'd have the committee stay. Thank you all for attending, and we'll have we'll convene a committee for questions.
So I'm finding almost invariably.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.